So we have a very special guest with us today. Joining me is Professor Juliette Kayyem. Professor Kayyem is an international leader in crisis management and homeland security. She serves as the faculty chair of the Homeland Security and Security and Global Health Projects at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Now, previously, she served as President Obama's Assistant Secretary at the Department of Homeland Security. And if you've turned on your television or watched news online or opened up an article on security in the last few months or ever, there is a strong chance that you've seen Professor Kayyem speak or read her insights. So we're very grateful that she has
Yeah.
chosen to join us today. Welcome, Professor Kayyem.
Thank you so much for having me.
So today's talk is on the state of security today. And I think what has been really interesting about arranging for you to speak with us was identifying a topic because things are changing so much
Yeah.
on a day-to-day basis in the world of national and even international security. So what do you believe
Yeah.
is the most pressing concern today and why?
Well, I mean, it's so funny you say that because it's like, how did we feel yesterday? Maybe we feel a little bit better today. I mean, I think I can start with the war, um, and I'm very honest about it. I think this was a decisive victory for Iran. If you look at the long-term consequences, so what I try to do is not get stuck on the headline, but think about the long-term, the tail of these incidents. So if you just look from the metric of its leadership is relatively the same, younger. It's nascent, but long-lasting democracy movement is probably over. We have no transparency on its nuclear materials or nuclear program, and now it has a capacity to essentially um, control a large amount of global supply chain, and will use it. And my guess is for the next 2 weeks it will use it. It's gonna charge a variety of countries. People say the Strait, or Trump will say the Strait of Hormuz is closed. It's not. It's tiered. And so, if I, from any metric, I view this as a success, and I view it as a failure for the United States, not simply because none of the goals that we talked about have been achieved, but not even regime change as it's commonly understood. But I think this will have very long-term poor consequences for the United States in terms of our allies, in terms of the frustration of such a disruptive thing being launched without engagement, without discussion, the long-term economic impacts. And then um, I think the idea of the American presidency and what it meant in the world. We've had presidents that are loved and hated in the by other nations. I think the idea of the American presidency is over. I think when a president talks and behaves this way, I don't think you're getting it back. I think there's some new thing of America, and I don't know what it is, but yeah.
So, when you speak about the American presidency as being over, do you mean in an international or domestic context or both?
Both. I mean, I think whatever one thought of presidents in the past. So I talked to people from all around the world. There are two things that or three. I would say three things. I'll add the third. The first is that there was a process. And I think this idea that America is responding to a singular individual rather than a process of debate and engagement and ideas, none of that is happening, and no one pretends it is. And I'm at a school of, we're at a school of public policy. That's very hard to explain to students who really view policy as part of it. So I think that's one, right? That the idea of America as very good at process, you can love or hate the outcome, is over. I think the second is reliability. And it's not like we keep our words or not. It's that we have never had a president, you know, talk about war crimes. like that. I'm just being honest with you. And whether you think that's the right approach or not, and it got them to it got them to negotiate. I don't know. I mean, it's just, is there a line that you don't want a president to breach? And then I think the third is the look, up until just several years ago, our competition with China was that you could have a free market, you could have a successful economy in China's case without the liberal democracy that all of us envisioned post World War II. And our image was that the more sustainable economic success story is only made possible by representative government and the liberal democratic norm. I don't think you can say that anymore. I just think and I think that's a shame. And when I say it's not coming back, it's like, I'm not saying never. It's just that the reliability factor is over.
Okay. I want to circle back a little bit or rewind to the first Trump
Yeah.
presidency. Could you speak to how that impacted national security as opposed to the second Trump presidency?
Yeah, it's such a good question. It's been very, so I'll just talk from my perspective. It's been very different than it had before. And Trump one, as I say to people, Trump 1.0 is very different than Trump 2.0. There's a couple reasons. So I feel it in my thing, like Trump 1.0, I still had a presence in DC. I was still advising, even as a Democrat, even as someone who criticized them publicly on the levels that we cared about, that I cared about, that they cared about in terms of making government work. That just is not the case anymore. I mean, Doge is sort of a perfect example of that government and ideas behind government or policy behind government is very difficult. And I think I'm not I think I'm not the only professor who will say this just feels very, very different. Trump 1.0, I still sat on home DHS committees. I still was in contact, maybe not with the secretary anymore, but certainly like the head of FEMA. I would consider them friends. This is very, very different. And what that means, so my work tends to be local and state a lot more. I'm lucky because I have Homeland Security, but it's not this.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think has changed? And rather, what, I think we all know what has changed, but rather, why has there been such a significant shift in your opinion?
So I think, I mean, it's interesting. Like, I think Trump views his first term as not successful. I mean, I think he just views it as he wasn't able, I mean, and it wasn't successful because he wasn't in power the next 4 years. Um, and I think he, I mean, I think Doge and this, I think Doge sort of really animated the way people like him think about government and government capacity. And I think that just sort of ran through as a through line in terms of you know what does government mean, right? It's always negative, right? It takes money, it has no good return on investment, it doesn't, and then all of a sudden you realize government does matter, right? And that's the challenge right now, as they rehire a bunch of IRS agents, or FEMA has to rehire because of a hurricane season, like actually these people actually do things. And so I think that is it. I think that they view the bureaucracy or the public policy as either the deep state or liberal. And I think that idea of government really did permeate throughout. I mean, besides NASA, you can't name a single agency where the nominee came in and uh, viewed and tried to nurture it. They all came in, Department of Education, DOJ, ODNI, Defense. I mean, they came in with a basically everything you've done to date is bad.
So I want to go back again to what you've mentioned about Doge. When did you get a sense that this administration was very different from the
Yeah.
first Trump?
Yeah, it was a very good. I mean, I was caught off guard just because I had a couple friends who I didn't even think could be fired tell me that they were let go. I joke that in 2026, I have not been to DC once. Can you imagine? I used to go twice a month. 2025, first full year of Trump, the first time I went to DC three times. One was work. Two were Doge related retirement parties. So I had a sense of how bad this is. I wrote a big piece for the Atlantic uh on we're going to miss them when they're gone. That the problem with judging efficiency as the sole metric of government's worth is a lot of what we want government to do is probably inefficient, in particular in the space I am, preparedness, planning, all that stuff that really doesn't matter until something's bad. So I went through a whole list of people that have been fired and or groupings that have been fired. I was like, that sounds like not a great, that sounds like, oh, that's waste until you realize what they do. One of them is, of course, and the Secretary of Transportation will often say, well, we didn't fire any air traffic controllers. Okay, I get that. You didn't fire any air traffic controllers, although many retired. You didn't fire any of them when we talk about aviation safety. But the FAA fired lots of people that are part of a safety ecosystem that support what air traffic controllers do. One of that groupings was a division of the FAA that existed for the sole reason that if there's debris in the skies, based an errant a satellite, a rocket, as was the case with Elon Musk, um, that they would divert commercial aircraft. They only exist for that reason. That's not efficient until that reason happens. And then people don't want to. And the irony is of course, uh, they uh, um, they were sort of brought back into place after a very scary moment where an Elon Musk rocket, I don't know if anyone remembers this, many of them have blew up, and we had to divert a whole bunch of airplanes.
I think, particularly with those of us who studied more on the IR path, international relations path at the Kennedy School, when you think of security, your mind automatically, or at least mine, would go to international security. But the current administration has also had quite an impact on domestic security beyond the TSA and FEMA. What do you think are the
Yeah.
greatest challenges in domestic security right now in the US?
So I mean, beyond, well, FEMA, I think is going to be a big one. I think it is I think we're not able to measure the breakdown of local, state, and federal integration that was part of the post 9/11 world that then switched and now is very antagonistic. And I don't know how to measure that right now until it breaks down, but it has broken down under immigration. But what people who aren't in my space, look, I've worked in state government, I'm in Homeland Security, I've had two federal positions. I know various things, right? Like in terms of how our federal system, we spent a lot of time bridging the gaps that we saw happen in 9/11 between local, state, and federal. Those have all a lot of them are torn up because of immigration, because ICE has come in, CBP has come in, and has essentially, broken that sort of previous understanding that the federal government can disagree with states and localities and vice versa, but that we all could agree on safety, and that's over.
So, I want to switch back to the international side of things. When you think of international safety, I'm thinking of Kennedy School classmates
Yeah,
many who were at USAID, and which doesn't really exist
it
anymore.
doesn't exist. Yeah.
Could you speak to the impact, um, of the dissolution of USAID on international and national security?
Yeah. I mean, part of it is I think there's just like a lot of challenges right now with the US. So like the first is going to be, you know, not just okay, so the first is just life, right? I mean, it just is like you can measure the distribution of food, the distribution of medicine, the distribution of aid, and you can measure it. So the first is just like life and well-being of I've seen the numbers of lots and lots of people that were whose lives were just made better because of USAID. And it didn't matter who the president was, it didn't matter who the administrator was. It was just a flip of the switch. It was just like it didn't take any judgment. So the second is, of course, soft power diplomacy, right? The stuff that Joe and I talked about, which is just essentially, the idea that USAID, even if you couldn't say, well, we saved this person, the idea that the United States was invested in trying to save that person or that community or that country from X, Y, or Z was important. It made people feel like the United States had its heart in the right place. We clearly don't have lost that. I think, though, there's a lot of remaining issues that will remain about issues that, these are my opinions, not yours or not the Kennedy schools, but around Gaza and what's happening in Lebanon. And I think outside of USAID, I think both the Biden and Trump administrations are, I don't give it names, but, can what USAID in the Biden administration offset what happened in the Biden administration in Gaza is, I think the history books are still out, right? And I think that's true for Trump as well. Look, if Trump still fully funded USAID, could it, you know, would that make us feel better about how we cared for people in parts of the world? Probably not. You know, part of it has to do with are we talking the talk, right? And I think, unfortunately, I think for Biden, that is going to be true on for Gaza, and I think for Trump, it's going to be true across the board.
So, it's interesting that you mentioned Gaza, given that Iran is top of mind
Yeah,
today, and again today, because everything changes every day. Could you speak to the role of what has happened in Gaza, um, what has happened October 7th onwards in
yeah,
terms of global national security,
yeah,
global security, and particularly security in the Middle East?
yeah. I think I mean I should say, I started off in counterterrorism. I am Lebanese American. My husband and children are Jewish. I am probably one of the few Americans alive who's, driven from Beirut to Damascus when one could still do that. Uh, so I well, I could talk about let me talk about where the American public is. And if you wanted to um sort of let me talk about where the American public is. And then so whatever is happening and whatever people want to say is happening, Israel has lost the American public. It's not just the liberals. It's not like the data is clear that what Israel did in response to the horrible terror attacks by Hamas against it was at some stage disproportionate to what an adequate response would be. And I think you're seeing that with Lebanon too. Like no one pretends like this is really about Hezbollah at this stage. This is about disruption of southern Lebanon. And anyone who's seen the bombings know those aren't strategic counterterrorism attacks. Those are attacks against medical facilities and all that stuff. So I think, I mean, I think that literally, if you wanted to create a strategy that would make Americans less supportive of Israel, I'm not talking about anti-Semitic or not, but just a less supportive of Israel as a nation, you literally could not have constructed a better one. And I don't think the Biden people have come to terms with that. I don't think the Trump people care about it, but I think that the unified voices on the outside, and both Democrats and Republicans, probably represent um, the future of how we're going to think about Gaza and Israel's behavior towards children and human beings and stuff like that. And we're seeing that now in Lebanon as well. It's just not for those of us who lived through it. You just can't call someone anti-Semitic solely because they're criticizing Israel. That's a dramatic change from 2.5 years ago. I can't describe it to people, but 2.5 years ago, you couldn't do that. You couldn't say, what is Israel doing? And I think, those of you who saw Secretary Blinken here in the Biden administration, I thought his response was honestly pathetic. I mean, I really did. I think, the idea that his response was, well, they were going to kill each other anyway, is not exact. We were only arming one side. So I think that there's going to have to be an accounting in foreign policy circles on the Democratic side. I think for the world, I think, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't know because Israel's politics are becoming more entrenched. So, and their involvement, if not, I'm just quoting from the New York Times, so no one accuse me of anything, Netanyahu essentially pushing this narrative. I mean, pushing this war. I don't know how that's gonna fall out with the Gulf states and stuff. I just don't know yet.
I mean, there has been some criticism of the current attack in it with Iran on the United States in that it's not fighting an American war. Can you comment on that? And these sentiments are, out there in the press for anyone to read.
And the sentiment being, say that again.
The sentiment that Americans are not necessarily fighting an American war.
Yeah. Look, I don't know. Here's how I view where we are right now. We never got the Congress never authorized this war. We never got reasoning for the war. There was no imminent threat. On the other side of 3 weeks of absolute madness, including the loss of American soldiers, a disrupted global economy, and who knows how many Iranians, let alone Gulf and Israelis, right? Like at the end of it, what? I mean, there's nothing. So either we fought this war and just didn't have the planning to do so, or and I think that is true. I mean, I actually think Netanyahu, look, Trump had a lot of people around him expressing skepticism, as we now know, right? John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, apparently J.D. Vance, but I never trust that reporting. Definitely Kane, the head of the Joint Chiefs. Um, he's an adult. He decided to go to war.
I want to take a little bit of a sociological or perhaps anthropological
Yeah.
view of things. We're seeing domestically with the rise of attacks and some of the more brazen actions of ICE in
Yeah.
Minneapolis, for example, um, very much a sense of us versus them within the United States. How is this fueling what's going forward? Is the United States, this melting pot anymore if these us versus them narratives are being, I would say, entertained? And what does
Yeah.
that have to do with respect to security?
So, um, I mean, a couple things. One is there is a cost for moving resources and personnel to interior immigration enforcement. And we've seen the numbers. That means there's FBI agents that are no longer working on, child pornography internet cases, and the number of DEA agents, one in every three, has moved to immigration enforcement. So, look, the cost is just in the bodies that used to do other things in a world with many, many risks are now doing this. The this second area is, of course, the trust between communities and law enforcement, which is something that here at the Kennedy School we've been very focused on because um, we sort of mastered it here, right? Is this idea of community engagement and neighborhood policing. That's over too, and we've scared populations from coming forward, and killed two to three Americans now, we know. And then I think the third area where it hurts us is if you believe that countries learn about each other through experience. All I that we are our foreigner travel is down significantly this year, various other things, right? So we're not creating uh, an environment in which students, travelers, like there's an economic impact to that, but there's also a societal impact to that.
Okay. For a long time, nuclear detente led
Yeah.
to a comparatively peaceful world. So what has changed and why?
Um, well, so far so good still. Oh, I mean, part of it is you have the two major nuclear powers now being led by people who I don't know if they view, if they have a sense of a disciplining impact, right? Of Trump has said, why do we have all these nuclear weapons if we don't use them? Putin has threatened it at various moments. So I think part of it is that the disciplining aspects of nuclear arsenal um, are not being remembered. They existed for a reason, which was not used with success. So yes, it's very disturbing,
So we've talked.
especially when we have a leader talking about, you know, annihilation. The language of annihilation is one that will get people very, very worked up.
So given all of how worked up people are on a
Yeah.
global and even on a domestic scale, why has there been no change?
No change where? Like,
With respect to why are we seeing continued examples of egregious behavior?
oh yeah. I mean, part of it is on the US side. I mean, first of all, I'm not sure that's true. I mean, you are seeing realignment by the Europeans. You're now seeing it by the Japanese as they begin to make deals with the Iranians. You certainly saw it with Canada. You're seeing it in North America and Central America. Look, India, Russia, they're going to all benefit from China, are going to all benefit from this. But I think one of the things is, I mean, this is true of those of you who were trying to get better at the Kennedy School, but, we tend to think of the US as the sun and the rest of the world sort of revolves around us. Well, this is what it means to be in a multi-powered world is we act and there will be reactions, obviously, right? So so that is absolutely clear to me. The other um is we have elections. And despite everything I thought about how what many in the Republican Party said they believed in, limited government, conservative rule of law, against fraud and waste, and nepotism, and um, no more engagements, all that stuff just wasn't true. And so it just takes elections.
So I'm really glad that you mentioned Europe and Japan and India
Yeah.
and Canada because I'm a Canadian and of course carry my own pride and prejudices as one. Our Prime Minister Mark Carney gave quite a memorable speech at Davos
Yeah.
earlier this year and spoke to the need for middle powers to unite. Are you able to share your thoughts on that and the role of middle powers in a multipolar world?
Yeah. So, I mean, I loved his speech. Even if it was very high and like, like, look, it will be operationalized. But I thought it was a reminder to the United States that if you are gonna blow up, so to speak, the post-World War II order, it will have consequences for the beneficiary of that post-World War II order, and that was us. That's how we became a superpower, right? It was that the alignment of resources and uh, shared ideologies and shared defenses, and all of it was um, was was beneficial to the U.S. I don't think Trump sees it that way, but that would and so the consequences of blowing up are it will be less beneficial to the United States. So I thought the speech was unbelievably helpful in setting up a way of thinking about the future.
Um, so we'll talk about other middle powers in the sense that we are seeing contentious, I would say, relations between even the UK, who's long been a staunch
Yeah.
US ally, Canada, a staunch US
Yep.
ally, and even France. So, what are your thoughts on
Who's left? Who's left? I know.
what are your thoughts on US relations with Europe right now, and
Yeah.
what, if anything, can the US do to repair those relations? And
Yeah.
I'll share an anecdote. I remember watching the Olympics, and there was an American spectator, and he had a sign saying, I'm sorry for something to the
Yeah.
effect, I'm sorry for what's going on. I
I
promise
was there. Yeah.
we'll do better. So um, that's sort of what I'm asking. What would
Right.
it take to do better?
Yeah, I mean, I think look, there's the high level stuff and then the lower. So look, we're hosting the World Cup. And I think there will be a lot of enthusiasm if we do it well. And I think that Donald Trump probably has an incentive for us to do it well on the economic side. So I'm hopeful on that, right? So that would be the other is the kinds of interactions that people have that are not at that level, so that uh, people hate I people hate um they might hate the Iranian regime or the US regime or the US presidency, but they don't hate the people. And I think that those kinds of outreaches, I think, do not underestimate sports, culture, movies, music as a wonderful American export. Um, Television that I think, you know, but yeah, I think the world is right. I think how you separate Trump from, I think, where most of the American people are is very difficult. And it sometimes takes like one-on-one.
So I want to move to a completely different part of the
Yeah.
world right now. We're talking so much about the Middle East, but we cannot ignore what happened in Venezuela
Yeah.
with respect to the overthrowing of President Maduro, and what's happening right now with respect to U.S.-Cuba relations. Can you
Yeah.
speak to the
So
U.S.?
it's interesting. So I think what happened in Iran has probably taken some of the wind out of the sail of Cuba, but I can't promise that. So let me just go to so it was Venezuela, Iran, and Cuba where we're going to be the three. All three of them are very, very different. So Venezuela now, as we now know, Trump sort of viewed it as a wonderful, moment. It was easy. You could kill someone else came forward. You could capture someone else came forward. But the foundation of what's happening in Venezuela has not changed at all from day to day now. I mean, it's the same leadership, it's the same, narco terrorist state, if you want to call it that, or as Trump said, there's just no metrics to say that that was a significant change. It was from the president to the vice president, a little bit like Iran. So then skip past, or we'll see what happens with Iran. So Cuba is really one in which I cannot predict that, because 2 weeks ago I thought we were definitely going in. I thought I think Trump got stuck. And I think but I thought 2 weeks ago we would be out of Iran. I mean, I really thought like, okay, we're just going to kill this guy. We have no other plan. We're going to, meaning we're going to leave. Because our pain threshold was, I thought, lower than it turned out to be, that Trump was willing to press us. The pain threshold changed with, of course, the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. So that then changed, I think, the likelihood that we would go into Cuba, because I think that they know unless they build the case, this is going to look silly after a while. Also, Cuba has an impact for us in a way that neither Venezuela or the Iran has, which is, we've had Cuban mass migrations about every 30 years, massive mass migrations of refugees to the United States. I'm not sure you want to bring that on right now. I don't think this administration would. So, unlike Venezuela, where you really wouldn't anticipate that, like, Cuba, if people are unsettled in Cuba, they get onto rafts and they show up in Florida. That's very, very different than Iran or Venezuela.
So we're talking about the Straits of Hormuz. I'm a
Yeah,
Canadian, so this is top of mind. We're looking at the role that Mexico, for example, is playing in the world right now. Mexico is sending aid and fuel to Cuba. One thing that has been, I would say, emblematic of this current presidency has been its impact on trade. We've seen
yeah,
tariffs um, rise and fall depending on the day. We've seen renegotiations or threats of renegotiation for key trade agreements like the USMCA or CUSMA. And now the greatest kind of trade block is the Straits of Hormuz. Could you
yeah,
speak a little bit about the impact of trade,
yeah,
what's happened in Trump 2.0 on security?
yeah. So it's I mean, one is, look, like, I mean, look, reliability is security, right? You have a sense of how the world is going to work, and any disruption in how the world is working is going to make you more vulnerable. So I just worry about that as a basic thing, right? The lines at the airports weren't a couple weeks ago weren't per se bad, but for anyone like me who likes systems that work, it always makes you a little bit nervous when a system doesn't work. So to that extent, the tariffs, the taco, Trump always chickens out, like all that stuff, the back and forth, I don't like that. I think there's two areas that I would focus on, in terms of of the US. The first is the corruption that's clearly, whether it's unknowable, like people obviously playing the betting markets for various decisions that aren't going to be made out of the White House, and the Wall Street Journal has been following that, or various major contracts going to friends of a cabinet secretary, is what was happening at Department of Homeland Security, or just the unknowable. What is, the billions of dollars for the Board of Peace that Trump demanded, that we have no idea where that money's going. I think countries that have rule of law look to countries that don't, like ours right now, or not enforceable law right now, as unreliable business partners, right? I think that's just the case. Look, I mean, I'm in the world of supply chain and safe supply chain. I said at the beginning of this war, the Americans think it's going to be one in the air, but the Iranians know it's going to be one in the waters. 80% of our cargo is transported on water in a world that is, in an earth that is mostly water. And anyone who can keep those supply chains going is going to be the victor, and going to have a lot to say about safety and security, about how easy is it to move around the world. I want to end this just sort of like one interesting player in all of this, and we just didn't talk about it, or what, just there was so much going on, is the insurance companies, right? The insurance companies stopped insuring a lot of cargo companies because the risk would be too high. And they have a lot to say about the market. I find it interesting.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. I hadn't made the connection.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch over a little bit to our group, W3D. We are a group of women for women. So I must ask, what are the most pressing challenges for women today with respect to domestic and national security?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, look, I mean, I am not the first to say it. Uh, I look at pictures of our government now, and I literally cannot believe it. I mean, the rooms are often only men. The rooms that used to be led by women or 50-50. It just, you think about who Trump has been willing to fire, Pam Bondi and Kristi Noem. Why not Pete Hegseth? Like, so you do get a sense, and we're in a cultural phenomenon of sort of trad wife and I just got an alert from the New York Times, the women who think that they shouldn't be allowed to vote. Like, we're in a reactionary stage in which women being at the table is either being denied or just not as accessible. And what I tell my students is that's not true at the state and local level. It's just not true. I mean, you look at, mayors, governors, like it is just not true. These are areas. So that's good. Um, but I think also, the issues that I put it a different way, like some of the most fearless reporters in the last 2 years or 3 years around Israel, Gaza, um, have been women. I mean, you look at CNN, you look at Al Jazeera, you look at AP. I mean, it is. So I do think like, even if you can't go into the space right now, like if you're interested in storytelling or whatever, like I do think that there are interesting areas. But look, we're in a culturally and socially reactionary time right now in the US around sort of the trad wife and the idea of woman at the table. And but I'm pretty confident that doesn't hold.
So I mean, you've been so generous with your time. I'm going to ask you one last-ish question because it's
Okay.
four questions in one. So you've advised one president. If
Yeah.
you could advise the one currently in power, what would you say? That's the first question.
Okay.
And the second is, what is it going to take for an American to drive from Beirut to Damascus again safely?
Ah, that is so good. Oh, I'll start with the second one. The Middle East is like it could be tomorrow for all I know. I love where I'm from, but it's not tomorrow. I mean, I do think it's going to be um a lot is going to depend on what we might extract from Iran, right? And whether getting to the brink is going to make, the Arab nations less hostile to Israel, and whether it will moderate Israel's politics right now. But we're in the world of annihilation right now, and it's not just from you hear commentators here saying, well, all the Arabs won't recognize Israel, as like Israel doesn't recognize the Arab nations anymore. It just doesn't. I mean, it is. So I'm not hopeful, but as I said, like, look, if you're Lebanese, you got to be hopeful, right? So that's one. Um, I honestly, and this is where I am right now, and I wasn't this way in Trump 1.0. Um, but after this week, I am this way. I wouldn't advise. I wouldn't. I think all Republicans, Democrats, Independents need to just check their conscience about whether this experiment that our founding framers really invested in, whether we're living up to their expectation of us.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you for all you do.
You're amazing, and thank you for sharing with us and for the audience for joining us today.
Thank you guys so much. Talk to you soon. Bye.